Hello, and welcome to our informational video about the Palmetto Air Quality Collaborative. In the Part 1 video, we discussed greenhouse gases, emissions, and the benefits of reducing emissions. In this webinar, we will discuss an overview of the Palmetto Air Quality Collaborative planning process and the South Carolina Climate Action Plan. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, or CPRG, program was established by the Inflation Reduction Act in August 2022 and is administered by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. It provides grants to states, metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs, tribes, and territories to develop and implement plans for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful pollution. The CPRG program is designed to provide flexible support to recipients, regardless of where they are in their climate planning and implementation process. Planning funds can be used to update existing climate, energy, or sustainability plans, or to develop new plans. There are two phases of CPRG. The first is the planning grant phase, which began in July 2023 when funds were awarded from EPA to South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. Phase 1 is a non-competitive grant, and all 50 states were eligible to opt in. South Carolina is one of 46 states in the nation to receive this $3 million planning grant. South Carolina's statewide initiative is called the Palmetto Air Quality Collaborative, or PAC, and is co-led by the South Carolina Office of Resilience, or SCORE, and the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, or DHEC. The South Carolina Ports Authority was also a subawardee of the grant and is using funding to research and plan how to reduce emissions from South Carolina's ports and related transportation. MSAs were also able to receive funding from this program. Two MSAs in South Carolina, Columbia and Greenville-Spartanburg, each received $1 million, and the Catawba Regional Council of Governments is part of the Charlotte MSA in North Carolina, which also received funding. The PAC is working with the MSAs through this process to create cohesive climate action plans throughout the state. There are three key deliverables from Phase 1, the first of which is the Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP, due to EPA on March 1, 2024. Phase 2 of CPRG is the Implementation Grants phase. This is a competitive grant with $4.6 billion available nationwide. EPA expects to award somewhere between 30 to 115 awards, ranging from $2 million to $500 million, depending on the quality of the applications they receive. The CPRG is a 4-year grant. Phase 1 funding was awarded in July 2023, and after DHEC and SCORE completed a contract for the grant, work began in the fall of 2023. The PCAP is due March 1, 2024, and then 1 month later, implementation grant applications are due, kicking off the Phase 2 of CPRG. Phase 2 will run concurrently with Phase 1 after this, with grant notifications coming in the summer of 2024 and funding by the fall, after which implementation grant activities will commence. Phase 1 consists of 2 additional required deliverables, which will run concurrently with implementation grant activities. These are the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, or CCAP, due in June 2025, and a final status report that is due at the end of the grant period in the summer of 2027. As of December 2023, the near-term focus is on the PCAP and the implementation grant application. The Palmetto Air Quality Collaborative, or PAC, is intended to build on and complement existing programs and planning efforts across the state. It focuses on innovative strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutants in South Carolina. The PAC is engaging communities, emphasizing workforce and economic developments, and advancing resilience for South Carolina's communities. This is all being done through interagency and intergovernmental coordination and collaboration, public stakeholder engagement, and input from action teams in order to develop implementable, quantifiable greenhouse gas reduction measures. The PAC process has a variety of groups and teams engaged to create the 3 deliverables, as well as the implementation grant application. The Public and Stakeholder Engagement Group meets weekly and consists of members from SCORE, DHEC, and the Energy Office. Members of this group attend meetings and events with external networks to promote the PAC initiative and send materials out to be added to newsletters or emails that can be disseminated through other networks and organizations. Members of this group have also been involved in planning the action teams and the Interagency Coordination Group. The Interagency Coordination Group had its first kickoff meeting on October 23, 2023. It consisted of state agencies such as the Department of Transportation and the Energy Office, the Catawba Indian Nation, representatives from 8 of the 10 South Carolina councils of governments, and local governments including counties, cities, and towns. The Interagency Coordination Group will assist SCORE and DHEC in developing priorities for the PCAP and the other deliverables, provide feedback on the deliverable draft reports, and also many members of this group have joined action teams. The action teams are sector-specific teams of experts and engaged stakeholders formed to help identify and evaluate quantifiable greenhouse gas reduction measures. Members can provide the PAC with their expertise from their field. Action teams include transportation, waste and materials management, agriculture and natural and working lands, greenhouse gas inventories, residential and commercial buildings, and industry. These teams will contribute to each of the 3 deliverables as well as with the statewide implementation grant application. There are multiple target dates for developing the PCAP. The process will require input from the action teams, the interagency group, the stakeholder engagement group, and the public. The PAC's publicly available stakeholder input survey is available on the PAC website and will remain open for the duration of the 4-year CPRG grant period, but all input that is to be considered for the PCAP and implementation grant application must be submitted no later than Friday, December 22, 2023. The PAC plans to have a draft of the PCAP posted on the website by January 19, 2024. Stakeholders and members of the planning teams will have 3 weeks to review and provide comments to the PAC, which are due by February 9, 2024. The PAC will then have 3 weeks to review comments and update the plan to submit to EPA by March 1, 2024. Finally, the PAC will then have 1 month to complete the statewide implementation grant application, due to EPA by April 1st. The PAC will begin working on the South Carolina statewide implementation grant application prior to submitting the PCAP final draft. Applying for one grant for the entire state will reduce or eliminate competition within the state between local governments and state agencies and should create a more appealing and competitive grant application. The application is due to EPA on March 1, 2024. All projects or programs included in the implementation grant must also be listed as a reduction measure in the state's PCAP. Eligible applicants for this grant include state and local government agencies, regional councils of government, and federally recognized tribes. Coalitions, subawards, and subcontracts are allowed, but there are some specific guidelines and rules about how these must be done that are included in the grant notice of funding opportunity. EPA is looking for applications with actionable, quantifiable greenhouse gas reduction measures and will award extra points for applications that reduce the most emissions within the next 5 years. EPA also requires a community benefits analysis, specifically focusing on low-income, disadvantaged community benefits that meet the White House's Justice 40 initiative. Another EPA priority is showing the needs of funding to implement the recommended programs or projects within the application, which should show how other funding sources can be complemented by the CPRG Phase 2 grant without duplicating them. For example, if South Carolina's application includes a project that already had available federal funding, but South Carolina did not apply for that funding, the project should not be included in the application because it would not score well. Each of the 3 deliverables has specific requirements that must be included. The PCAP's first requirement is a statewide greenhouse gas emissions inventory, or accounting of all emissions within the state. As of December 2023, the inventory is in the draft stages of production. The second requirement is quantified greenhouse gas reduction measures, which will be developed and analyzed by the action teams. The third requirement for the PCAP is a community benefits analysis that demonstrates South Carolina's Priority Climate Action Plan meets or exceeds the Justice 40 initiative. The Justice 40 initiative states that 40% of benefits from federal funding sources should go to low-income, disadvantaged communities. These communities are identified using the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, an online White House tool that looks at a series of census data to determine climate burdens on communities. Finally, the PCAP must include a review of authority to implement, which details which agency or organization has the legal authority to implement the included reduction measures. The CCAP and status report both build on these requirements, adding requirements of emissions projections, greenhouse gas reduction targets, an intersection of other funding availability, a workforce planning analysis, and future planning for budget and staffing needs. The PCAP process may identify data and analysis gaps that the PAC will seek to address in the later phases of the program. Greenhouse gases included in South Carolina's inventory are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, sulfur hexafluoride, hydrofluorocarbons, and perfluorocarbons. These 6 gases are used across state, national, and international inventories in line with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, guidelines. For more information on greenhouse gases and climate science, please see the first video in this series. Greenhouse gases can be measured by the sector or source they come from. These figures were created using EPA's U.S. Inventory of Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Sinks by State from 1990 to 2021, and are not from the draft of the state's greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The figure on the left shows the percentages of emissions from each sector for the year 2021. Transportation and electric power are the state's largest sources, accounting for 41% and 31% of total statewide emissions, respectively. South Carolina's emissions by the remaining sectors were industry, 14%, commercial buildings, 7%, residential buildings, 4%, and agriculture, 3%. South Carolina is above national emissions by percentage in transportation and electric power, and lower than national emissions in the industry, agriculture, and residential sectors. South Carolina's emissions are equal to the national percentage for the commercial sector. The figure on the right visualizes emissions from 1990 to 2021 by sector and shows that emissions are higher now than they were in 1990, although they were at their peak around 2004 to 2008. Emissions change over time with things such as population growth, changes in technology, and intentional reductions. Looking at emissions trends over time can assist planners and decision makers with understanding where the most effective reductions can happen, and establishes a baseline for future measurements so the state can track its emissions reduction progress. The PAC will be using EPA's Statewide Inventory Tool, or SIT, for the PCAP's greenhouse gas inventory. This tool is available to the public on EPA's website and contains 11 estimation modules and 1 module to synthesize estimates across all modules, listed here. SCORE will develop the inventory, and DHEC's Bureau of Air Quality will provide technical assistance and review. After the PCAP, SCORE may use other tools or data to increase accuracy in emissions accounting, depending on needs, gaps, or opportunities that are identified during the PCAP phase. The SIT tool provides a standard methodology to calculate emissions, following the guidelines of EPA as well as international organizations such as the IPCC. It allows states to use default preloaded data that are gathered by federal agencies, or states may customize the tool with state-collected data. Using the default data is in line with the inventory of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions and sinks report that EPA publishes annually and submits to the IPCC. This is a top-down approach to an inventory. All modules in the SIT examine direct emissions of greenhouse gases, with the exception of electricity consumption, which estimates indirect emissions. The PAC will use the default data within the SIT tool for the first greenhouse gas inventory included with the PCAP. However, EPA does not provide data on hectares burned, so this data will be provided to SCORE by the South Carolina Forestry Commission. Each greenhouse gas remains in the atmosphere for different lengths of time, ranging from a few years to thousands of years. Because different greenhouse gases may be better at absorbing and trapping heat than others, or may remain in the atmosphere for much longer periods of time, all emissions quantifications are reported in million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or MMT-CO2e, using standard conversions used in the IPCC's AR6 and supported by EPA. This ensures all gases are compared and analyzed on the same scale, and allows the PAC to effectively target the correct emission sources with reduction measures and implementation programs. Some SIT modules contain data measured in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. In these modules, SCORE will conduct basic unit conversions to report all data with the same units. Reduction measures are broad-ranging and may include programs, policies, or projects that will either directly or indirectly reduce greenhouse gas air pollution. The PAC intends to include reduction measures in the PCAP that are voluntary, incentive-based, and supportive of other programs and initiatives occurring across the state. There is no intent to develop new regulations or requirements. EPA has developed specific requirements for the PCAP as well as the implementation grant application. For the PCAP, the measures must be implementable in a 5-year period and must align with state priorities. At a minimum, each measure should include a greenhouse gas reduction estimate for both a 10-year period and a 25-year period. The measure must also address who has the authority to implement, and finally, should include a discussion about the community benefits and cost estimates. For the implementation grant application, each proposed program or project must be incorporated into the PCAP and must show the magnitude of reductions for a 5-year period and a 25-year period. In addition, each program within the implementation grant application must demonstrate the need for funding and must include a cost-effectiveness analysis, a discussion on the co-benefits, and a discussion about community engagement. PAC is planning and writing the PCAP as well as the implementation grant application by sector using action teams. 5 action teams will discuss, analyze, and recommend reduction measures within their sector. These action teams are residential and commercial buildings, agriculture and natural and working lands, waste and materials management, industry, and transportation. The final action team is the greenhouse gas inventory team, which will assist the PAC with reviewing the data, identifying gaps or uncertainties, assisting with quantifying reduction projections, reviewing visualizations, and looking forward to make greenhouse gas accounting more accurate within South Carolina. Here are some examples of possible emissions reduction measures based on the sector focus of the PAC's 5 action teams. This list is not exhaustive or comprehensive, but includes examples of measures that could be discussed or considered throughout the PCAP planning process. The South Carolina PCAP will include reduction measures that are voluntary and incentive-based, and could also expand projects or plans already in place. Once included in the PCAP, measures will then be further considered for a request for funding through the implementation grant application. Measures may focus on reducing emissions or on increasing carbon sequestration and storage. For example, within the agriculture sector, the PCAP may recommend expanding Clemson Extension's Climate Smart program to sequester carbon while also improving crop yield for small farms around the state. Other potential measures that focus on storing carbon include forest management, urban tree planting programs, development of green spaces, and expansion of programs that preserve and restore natural lands and ecosystems. Reducing emissions in the building sector could be done through measures such as rebates or grants for retrofitting and weatherization of the existing housing inventory, providing incentives for new construction to include carbon-storing materials and energy-efficient appliances, installing microgrids, and updating building codes. In the transportation sector, some reduction measure examples include installing EV infrastructure at all city halls or certain schools around the state to create resilience hubs, expanding public transportation, or grants for newer, cleaner engines for heavy-duty vehicles. Incentives could also be utilized for ports, rail, bicycle lanes, and other modes of transportation. Examples of reduction measures from the industry sector include offering incentives for certain production practices or materials, or electrifying small businesses to reduce their power consumption. In the waste sector, measures could focus on things like reducing and reusing waste, community composting, on-farm anaerobic digester systems, biogas production and methane collection, or converting waste pickup vehicle fleets to electric vehicles. Thank you for your interest in the PAC and for taking the time to watch this video. If you have further questions or want to get involved, please email paqc@scor.sc.gov or visit our website at http://scor.sc.gov/PAQC.